Thanks everybody for coming today. I'm going to present some data that I did on an action research project here in my class with my second graders. And Ms. Hall, the other second grade teacher, actually helped me implement it because she co-teaches reading with me. And what my topic is really try to engage boys and increase their motivation in reading, because most of you know that I have a large amount of boys in my class this year. And when I started getting into the research, we figured out that there was a lot of data proving that nonfiction really seems to gauge their interest, and they're more interested in facts about animals and sports and things like that. And this is just some background information about my class. I have 20 boys and 5 girls, and as most of you know, many of the male students are struggling readers that read below grade, started the second grade reading well below grade level. And many of them view reading as a negative experience, and they express that orally when we're reading in class by yelling out. And some examples are saying, "I'm bored, I don't like this story, do we have to read this, do we have to do Dear today?" And there's really a lack of engagement and interest in reading, which increases the amount of class disruptions and negative behaviors. And when I started looking at the research, I found a bunch of different things that said boys devote less time to reading, tend to be less confident readers, have less motivation to engage in reading, and they do not value reading as a free time activity and have a lot less interest in reading than girls. And I think most of us know that, working with especially kids at a younger age. The girls are very eager to read in most cases, and some of the boys would rather be playing outside or things like that. There's a couple more to support it that say male students are developing negative connotations towards reading at a very early age, and it becomes more difficult to motivate them as they keep getting older. And by the time many male students reach high school, almost 50% of males consider themselves non-readers entirely. And when we started getting to the research, we also had to submit a proposal about what we think an ideal reading program should consist of. And these were some of the highlights of the program that I thought things should have. And the good news is the reading program that we implement here at our school has most of these, with little tweaks and things that we've added, especially here in the past couple of years. I feel like we meet all of these components of an ideal reading plan. We have a core reading curriculum. It's based on the 5 components of reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. And there's a balance of that, especially with the younger grades, and focusing more on comprehension in the older grades. And we provide teachers and students with access to a variety of instructional materials. We have newly furnished classroom libraries that have an equal balance of fiction and nonfiction text to meet all student interests. And we also have early and effective interventions. We use multiple sources of data to inform our instruction every day. We provide our students with daily writing opportunities, and teachers provide a comfortable and engaging reading environment where the students feel safe to read out loud and to ask questions and things of that nature. So when we were told we had to come up with an action research project, our professor kept telling us, think about your problems. What is your biggest problem in the classroom? What area they wanted this is going to help you, so what are you going to do? When trying to decide, I thought about the observations from my classroom and then the articles that I've been reading about that highlighted the lack of motivation that boys have to read. I decided to begin researching strategies that I could implement to try to increase the motivation in relation to reading with my male students. And this book I'd read in previous courses, and it's called Reading Don't Fix No Chevys, and it's an entire study about young males in 5th, 6th grade and then into middle school, about how they don't think they need reading, they don't see a purpose for it in their life because they're going to go into trade jobs and they don't understand why they need to read novels and literature and things like that. And the authors of this book reported that boys are more likely than girls to read informational text, magazines, newspapers, and hobbies and sports books. And so then we started thinking, well, what can we do? What can I do to help this in my classroom? In many lower grade levels, especially kindergarten through 2nd grade, the primary text that is used is narrative, which is not preferred by males. And in fact, it is estimated as much as 90% of what is read in elementary school children is in the narrative form. But recently I was at a training for the Common Core initiatives coming up, and most of you have heard this. As we're moving towards implementation of the new standards, there's going to be a strong initiative to develop a more balanced approach to using fiction and nonfiction, especially in the lower grade levels. And they actually said that it should be about 50-50 in K through 2 with fiction and nonfiction. So then I developed my research proposal, which said, can nonfiction text be used to increase engagement and motivation with male students in reading? And my plan was to supplement the basal reading program that we use with nonfiction literature. I would determine if it would increase the motivation and engagement by using multiple different types of assessments. And then I included multiple forms of nonfiction that were available in our updated classroom libraries. And I decided to use student surveys and interviews to assess their interests and then select materials based on these results. And we decided we would still teach the same skills following the pacing guide in our readers. We would just be using a different text during those weeks. And observations, journal entries, interviews, and surveys were used to monitor thoughts and feelings of the students as we went along. So the setting when we started to implement the plan was during our second grade reading block, which we co-teach together here in my room. And the students are divided into 3 groups, and they were mixed, but for the purposes of this project, we mixed them into 2 groups of boys and one group of girls. So when they rotated their stations, the boys were together. And they visited 3 stations each day. Ms. Hall did the vocabulary station in the back of the room. Then I worked on the comprehension, and then we used the technology with the iPads and the laptops to work on the same skills using Study Island, fact and opinion, and compare and contrast. They were still practicing those skills in their groups in the 3rd station. And they were in here for an hour, so they spent 20 minutes rotating at each station. And the participants in this plan were the 21 male students that were in our group. The girls also participated, but we were only focusing on the data from the male students. And of those, there were 13 that were white and 8 were African American. And 2 of the males actually started the year in the strategic group, and as we progressed and they showed progress throughout the year, they moved into our higher level reading group in here. When we assessed them when we started the project, 11 of the 21 were reading on the 2nd grade level, or right around that, based on their fluency scores. And the other 10 males were just below level, but they were still making good grades in reading and able to comprehend the 2nd grade level text we were using, so we felt comfortable in letting them use the text that we were going to be using. And many of them, we were kind of struggling. The stations were working, but they still kind of seemed uninterested in some of the stories in our reading books and not engaged. And they would verbally express those feelings when we were in our reading block. And the procedure, how we started, we administered 2 surveys to all the students that targeted their interests and their attitudes. And all the students participated. Like I said, the girls were a part of it, but I only analyzed the data from the male students. The first survey was a simple reading interest inventory, just to ask them what types of things would you like to read about. The top 3 results from the survey were dinosaurs, cars, and sports. And the format, the books they said they would like to read were chapter books, magazines, and picture books. So we took that into consideration when I was selecting the text that we were going to be using. And then the second survey is an elementary reading attitude survey. And it uses pictures of Garfield. There are 4 different pictures of the Garfield. And the one scale, he's extremely happy. And then the opposite end of the scale, he's very sad and mad and just looks like he's not enjoying it. And it assesses their personal feelings towards recreational reading and academic reading. It asks them, how do you feel about reading a book at home when you could be outside playing? How do you feel about reading books in school? And we focused on the academic reading section because that was the area we were really trying to increase their motivation. And we gave that survey before and after the plan was implemented. The attitude survey, the results from that pretty much directly correlated with what we were seeing when they were sharing out loud. They kept saying that they weren't enjoying reading and they were frustrated. And the class average raw score of the attitude survey was a 23.9, and each one is a 1 through 4 scale. So what that showed was indicates that the students selected a large number of 1s and 2s, which means they did not enjoy that activity, which relate to a dislike for reading activities. So based on the results from the 2 surveys, we designed a plan to incorporate the use of chapter books and nonfiction text into the classroom. And the books that we started the program with were the first book in the Magic Treehouse series, Dinosaurs Before Dark. And we started with the chapter book, and then we moved into the nonfiction companion that goes along with that book, the Dinosaur Fact Tracker. And I made copies of the text. We had about 4 books, but we wanted them to be able to highlight vocabulary, so I made copies for each student to have a copy of the text. And what we did is, in the small group with me, we read about 1 chapter a day, and we would discuss it together in small groups and talk about what was going on. And then when we moved into the nonfiction fact tracker, the students would record their facts and journal entries. I gave them each their own fact tracker notebook, and they kept up with the facts like Jack and Annie did in the first book, and they really seemed to relate to the characters. And the study took place over an 8-week period, and we conducted informal student interviews. We documented observations while we were working with them, and her and I would collaborate and talk about, well, this is what the kids were saying in my group, or I heard them talking about this when I was reading with them on the carpet. The students viewed several magazines and other informational books, and we actually used some real fossils during the reading experience to try to increase their engagement in the activities. And then they also completed assessments that targeted both vocabulary and comprehension that we created based on the standards and the skills that they needed to be assessed on. And once we completed reading the 2 books, this is how we started our data collection and the results. There were exit interviews that I did one-on-one with each student, and they shared feelings about the change in the reading program and what they liked or didn't like about the reading class over the past 8 weeks. And then they also shared a long journal entry in which we asked them to explain what you liked or didn't like about it, because we did have a couple students who just said, I didn't like it because they thought they weren't going to have to write the paragraph explaining why they did like it. So we really stressed that they had to provide details to support why you did like it or why you didn't like it. And then we also gave the attitude reading survey again at the completion of the project. And the students noted in their journals and the personal interviews that they really enjoyed the changes made to the reading program. And we could kind of tell that just from our observations when we were watching them. They were really excited about the reading, and they kept begging me to keep reading on to the next chapter. They said, please let us read another chapter today. We don't want to stop reading. And that was definitely a 360 from where we were with the books, and the stories in the reading book. And here we're going to start talking about the findings. Throughout the 8-week period, like I said, I used several sources of data to monitor and observe the changes in their student attitudes, including observations, interviews, numerous student work samples, and student surveys. The reading attitude survey was my primary source of data because it gave me a numerical calculation in a way that I could really track whether their motivation had increased or not. And the survey did indicate an increase in the overall student scores of the male student feeling towards academic reading alone over the 8 weeks. And the next slide displays the pre- and post-assessment scores, and it also indicates whether the students increased or decreased from the pre to the post-assessment. But also it highlights the students that increased by 5 points or more, because the writers, the people who developed the survey, said that in order for a significant change to occur with the child, there has to be at least a 5-point increase from the time they took the survey to the second time. The writer said that an increase will show a slight change in their attitude, but if you really want to see a significant change, it has to be at least 5 points or more. And I have the data here for you, but I'm going to give you the copy of it here because it's color-coded, and it shows you that of the 21, only 3 decreased. They had a negative feeling towards the reading, but the other ones all had a strong increase, and I'm going to show you the numbers of that, but the class average actually increased by 5.8%. So there was a significant increase in the male motivation from the beginning to the end of the survey. as you can see, there were some rather large increases. Student 1 had a 13 point increase from the pre to the post. Student 9 had an 18 point. Student 5 was 24 points difference. And some of that I think came from students at the beginning. They were in such a negative state about reading, and they really were frustrated in here. And when we gave the survey, we were still reading fictional stories out of their reading book, and anything that related to reading at school they were done with. They said they didn't want to do, and a lot of those students circled straight ones down the beginning of their survey. So they had a dramatic increase when they really liked the way we were doing reading the second time around. The overall class average increased by 5.8 points, and like I said, the survey states that there has to be a 5-point increase in order for it to be considered a significant change. 17 of the 21 students increased their academic reading score, and 13 of the 21 had a 5-point increase or more, which means that 13 of the 21 males showed a significant increase in their motivation and their attitudes towards reading over the 8-week period. And some of the questions that were included on the survey were how they felt about the text they were reading in class, how they felt about learning new things from a book, how do you feel about taking a test in reading, and their feelings every morning when the teacher says it's time for reading. How does that make you feel? And some of the observations and interviews, these are some of the written responses from the transcripts of their interviews. Students clearly exhibited strong interest in the text. Like I said, they begged us to keep reading more chapters after the time was up. I actually kept the books. I had extra copies on the shelf, and during deer time, they were trying to pull them out and read ahead, so I had to collect all of the books and keep them with me so we could all experience the book together. And we also noticed they were talking about the text outside of the reading class. We would hear them on the playground pretending to dig up fossils and talk about specific kinds of dinosaurs and things. Then they actually wanted to write a proposal to Miss East about going on a field trip to New Mexico to see a specific crater that they thought, this is the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, and they wanted to go see if that was really there, and that was why. And they were begging, please let us talk to Miss East about going on a field trip there. And they said, I told them I didn't think we had enough money in our budget for that. But they were really, it was a 360 difference with the kids, the way they felt about reading, and were talking about it when they didn't have to be. And they shared numerous reasons during their interviews as to why they enjoyed the changes, and there's a couple of those. Some of the student responses were they liked learning facts about dinosaurs. They were glad they didn't have to take a spelling test every week. In place of the spelling test, we selected content level vocabulary words that they needed to be able to know by sight and recognize, and also truly understand the definition of those words and how to use them in a sentence. So we focused more on the vocabulary component than a phonics component, and they said they were really glad about that. They enjoyed playing games to review the story and vocabulary words. We incorporated the Zap game just to review the vocabulary terms after we've been reading them for a while. We invented a silent vocabulary game in which the kids would direct my arm by thumb signals. We would have the words posted and nobody would talk, and I would give them a clue and they would guide my arm without me looking, and they really seemed to enjoy games like that to review. And they really thought it was a good idea to keep a fact tracker notebook with the facts in it. And we're moving back, we're using some stories back from our Basel reader, but they asked if we could still keep using the fact tracker notebooks to do their graphic organizers and things like that in. And one of the students said, I liked that I got to compare and contrast different types of dinosaurs. We built T-charts, Venn diagrams. We used a lot of different ways to talk about plant eaters and meat eaters, and they really got into those activities. And they also, a lot of the students in their interviews shared positive feedback about using the iPads and computers to research the dinosaurs. We would use iPads in the vocabulary group because a lot of the vocabulary words were names of dinosaurs that they hadn't seen before, and they would get to research pictures of them and research about what happened to them, which dinosaur period did they live in. They were talking about the Cretaceous period, and they would say, well, this one lived from this time period, and it was just a really unique change to see their vocabulary shift in that direction. And then we have some student responses here that I'm going to play for you that they shared as to why they liked the change in the program.
I like the part where we got to see actual and real dinosaur skeletons.
Did you like reading those kind of chapter books?
Yes,
Why'd you like those more than the other books?
because they were more cool and longer.
So you like reading longer books?
Yes.
Okay.
The reason I love that is because I love dinosaurs. Those books are really fun and everything. I like reading chapter books because we got more stuff to read. I like the dinosaur fact tracker books because it was better than a reading book because you got to learn about dinosaurs.
So you would rather use those kind of books instead of your reading book?
Yeah. To read the dinosaur books because you have all kinds of stuff in it.
What's something you learned about dinosaurs?
That you can make discoveries about what kind it is.
And how could you tell what kind of dinosaur it is?
Because you gotta look at its poop. If it had bones in it, it's a meteor. If it had sunflower seeds in it, it's a leaf eater.
Good job. What he said there. That was probably one of the funniest parts of the whole thing. When we were reading in the fact tracker, it was paleontologists sharing how they would use, it said droppings of dinosaurs to tell whether they were a plant eater or a meat eater. And one of the kids said, "Miss Hardy, what are droppings?" And they all yelled out, "That's poop." So then every day it was continuous talk about dinosaur poop, and we talked about whether you would like to be a paleontologist or not, and we even had students, they were talking about, well, I bet today that now paleontologists don't even have to touch the poop because they probably have machines that you can put the poop in and it will analyze it. And they were really thinking about this stuff, and they were really engaged and excited about it. But then they were still learning the same skills. We were still covering fact and opinion, compare and contrast, title, character, setting, all of the components that we use in our reading books, but they were really enjoying what they were doing. And then the girls even enjoyed the nonfiction too. We have a couple of their responses.
The part that I liked about it is I liked that we didn't read the whole story and we read little parts of it every day.
So you liked learning a little bit each day and kind of leaving you hanging for the next day? Like you got to keep telling the story? Okay. Would you like to keep reading chapter books like that?
Yes.
So I talked to her earlier about it, and she said it reminded me of watching TV because I didn't know what was going to happen next, and I had to wait until the next day to figure out what we were going to be talking about in reading.
I really like seeing the fossils.
Okay, did you like learning about the dinosaurs?
Yes.
What's something you learned about dinosaurs?
That they had sharp teeth.
Okay. What did you learn about what dinosaurs eat, Haley?
I know that leaf eaters eat leaves and meat eaters eat bones, guts, eyeballs, brains, and skin and meat.
And that doesn't gross you out? Did you like learning about stuff like that?
Yeah.
You like the dinosaurs?
Yeah.
Okay.
I liked when we saw the pictures on the iPad and when we did facts.
What's a fact you learned about dinosaurs?
There's fossils that are eggs.
Okay, and they found those. Anything else? Okay. So, in the end, my reflection, the students were very excited at the beginning of the project, and like I said, they were eager to keep reading every day. and it was a very pleasant change to the reading instruction, and they actually maintained high levels of interest and engagement throughout the entire first book. We got through that one a lot quicker than I thought we would because we read through the book so fast. And then I was really worried about disengagement when we moved into the nonfiction fact tracker, because it had a higher Lexile score, and it was a little bit more of a difficult read. But where I read it with them and we were able to work through the difficult words, and they actually appeared, their interest increased during that book, because that's when I brought in the fossils and they were acting like paleontologists, and they really got to engage with the text. And I was also very surprised at the success on the written assessments and their participation in class discussions. The students scored, most of them, I have the data from that also, most of them scored either mastery or partial mastery on most all of the vocabulary and comprehension skills that we assessed, which was an increase from novice and partial mastery, which they've been scoring on some of the other tests. And I feel like now that I have a clearer understanding of meeting student needs and interest levels while still teaching the second grade content. I know when I first started, I was really worried about, this is my manual, I have to follow it every single day, and I have to go in this order. And even when people are telling you it's okay to pull in other things and get away from it, but now seeing the success from it, and it is very time consuming when you have to create your own assessments, and it's a lot easier to rely on computer programs that have it all made out for you. But the decrease in the behavior problems and the increase in the student engagement is worth the extra time it takes to plan these types of lessons and use these engagement activities in your classroom. So, thank you for your time. That's everything. These are some of the kids with their fossils.